So to start digital circlism, drag your image directly into Photoshop. It will open up as the default size. And if you see a graph or a grid over top of your image, go to View and make sure you uncheck extras or any other checks that are on here. Now I'm ready to start building layers on top of my image, and I can cut through those layers to relieve the area behind. First though, to prep the background, we're going to go to Image, Adjustments, and select Posterize. When I select Posterize, levels will show up. I would use the computer's default, whatever it went to. It basically is taking the different colors in the image and simplifying them, combining them. You can bump these up if you want it to be more detailed, or bump them down for less detail. But in most cases, whatever the computer gives you will work out pretty well for this project. Click OK. And now we're going to go down and put a layer over top of this. To do that, we'll go down to the Layers panel, click Add or Create New Layer, and Layer 1 will show up. We're going to fill that with black. So we're going to go over here to our palette, make sure black's on top. Go up to the Paint Bucket tool, and we're going to fill that. If you don't see the Paint Bucket tool and you just see the Gradient tool, click and hold the Gradient tool and then let go over top of the black bucket, and you'll be able to fill this now with black. So I'm going to click on the image, it will fill with black, and I'm going to turn the opacity down on that black layer. So where it says opacity, turn it down to around 60%. That's a good percentage to work with. With layer 1 selected and the opacity turned down, we're going to zoom in and start our work wherever the object is that's closest to you. So in this case, since I have a portrait, the tip of the nose is closest to the viewer. We're going to make the largest cuts there, and the cuts will get smaller and smaller as they go back through space all the way back to the back of the head. So with the eraser chosen, I'll go up and change the size of it. Make sure it's a hard round eraser, not a soft one. And I'm going to make the size of mine pretty small, probably around 10 pixels or so. We'll try 12. And I can start to cut out some of these spheres. Work as detailed as you can. Try to keep them pretty much equidistant. So I have a cutout here on the tip of the nose, and I'm working in a circular motion because the tip of the nose is circular. And as I bend back in space, I want to drop down the size of my pixels. You can highlight this little area up here and type in a number. So I'll type in 12. That's just a little bit smaller. And I'm working away from that centralized area in a circular motion. Then I can drop the size of it down even further as I work back into space. As you work back into space, pay attention to the direction that your line work is being created by cutting these areas out. We want to create cross contours. Cross contours, again, are lines that define form. As they go across the surface, they bend with the surface topography. So a good analogy is if an ant were to walk through ink and then walk across the face, that line that's left, you'd want to basically trace those lines. They're defining the shape as you cut them out. So work as detailed as you possibly can. If you want to add some effects, you can take your zoom tool and zoom in even further. And with smaller brushes, you can go in between some of the larger brush marks that you leave, the larger circles. That will add even more detail. It's a little bit time consuming, kind of tedious, but the effect that you get is really, really cool, and I would suggest going back in and doing some of that. To check your work with layer 1 selected, just turn the opacity all the way up, and you can zoom out to start to check to see what those little dots that are going together end up looking like. I have an image that's a little bit further along, so I'll drag that into Photoshop, and as I turn the opacity up, you can see that I've got big cutouts or big dots closest to the viewer, and these little dots that are going back into space are starting to define the form that I'm going for. Remember at the end of the day, each day, to save your work. In this case, put your first and last name on it, and DC for digital circlism, or DC2 if it's the second one, or DC3 if it's the third. Save it to your desktop, save it to the computer always, not the cloud, and make sure you save it as a Photoshop for format. Don't save it as any other format because it can flatten.